And Nature magazine had this article in February 2025 saying more and more evidence that it came from raccoon dogs in the market. They quote six people. They only quote six scientists, all of whom have long on the record, including these scientists that changed their mind in public and private and said it came from nature. They quote no one on the other side. A couple of weeks later, the French Academy voted 97% to 3% that the lab origin is just as probable as natural origin. I should say the Institute of Medicine, which became the National Institute of Medicine in 2005, commissioned an expert group to assess these modeled projections. It was led by actually a fellow who was a professor at Princeton at the time, and a very eminent group, including Harvard professors and so on. And they looked at the empirical evidence to support these measures and found they were unconvinced. They thought that these measures were unlikely to work, that there was very little evidence for them, that they would be extremely costly, and that it was very important for political leaders, public officials, to be emphatic with the public before implementing these measures, that the evidence was weak, and that they were certain to be very costly, not just in economic terms, but in terms of basic human well-being.
Welcome to the New World, thorough conversations in times of change. My name is Adrian Verbrugge and my guest today is Stephen Macedo, Professor of Politics and Human Values at the Princeton University, and we're going to talk about his latest book, In COVID's Wake. Professor Macedo, Stephen, a very warm welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Yeah?
Yes.
Is it the first time for you visiting the Netherlands?
No, I've been to the Netherlands a few times before, but first time in Leiden. It's a beautiful city.
Yeah, it's one of the most beautiful cities in the Netherlands, I think.
I agree with you.
Yeah, and we're in a lovely place.
It is absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, this is in fact, this is the Rijn.
Oh, yes, okay.
We called it Rembrandt van de Rijn.
Yes, yeah.
And that's exactly, he's mentioned after this famous river, of course.
Yeah, of course it is.
But it's, in the Netherlands it becomes smaller and smaller. So this is the last part.
Okay.
It's called the Old Rijn.
Okay, I saw some larger boats docked over there.
Yeah, still. In COVID's Wake, a book in which you reflect together with your colleague Francis Lee on the COVID period and all the policies. It was published this spring, in March of this year.
Yes.
What was the reason you wanted to publish a book like this?
Yeah, well, I mean, I actually started out writing something broader. I wanted to work on several topics in which I felt that progressives, people on the progressive part of the political spectrum, were not paying enough attention to arguments coming from the other side.
Okay.
So I was going to work on immigration, abortion, and COVID policy. COVID was the part I knew least, so I started working on that, and I soon realized that there was so much there.
Yeah.
So few people looking at it. I mean, the astonishing thing is that there's little that's been written in the United States. Few conferences going on. Biggest global crisis since World War II.
Yeah.
And yet educated elites seem to, and many others kind of want to ignore it. And there's just so many interesting questions around it. It's been fascinating to work on.
And I think the interesting thing, especially in the United States, you have this difference between policies of the states, Republican states and more democratic states. Yes. So we have data on this as well. And I think it's still a topic that divides the people.
Yes.
Also in the United States up to this day.
Yes, without question. As you say, policy on COVID was basically made at the state level. 50 states, 50 different policies, though they divided by politics. Republicans tended to go one way, Democrats tended to go another way. Advice was given from Washington, but the mandates, the orders, policy decisions were made at the state level. As in Europe, with the 29 states of Europe, we have data.
It's a completely different situation, we would say, because we're not the United States of Europe. Yeah. But nevertheless, it's fascinating to see for us in one country you have this different approaches.
Yes.
And different outcomes also.
Yes.
And that's we were going to talk about that, but. I think it's good to follow the chronology of the pandemic itself, and let's start with the period before. So there was some literature on policies, and the surprising thing is that none of them recommended this kind of huge quarantines, and so which we have seen.
Yeah, it wouldn't be quite right to say that none of them recommended, but the balance of opinion was skepticism about non-pharmaceutical interventions. And that's everything we did before the vaccines were available. So school closures, border closures, contact tracing, mask mandates, and other mandatory measures to try to curb transmission of the virus. Those things were studied for decades as part of pre-COVID pandemic planning documents in the United States going back to 2005. And the balance of opinion was skepticism. And there were these reports that came out just before the COVID pandemic. So the World Health Organization did one in 2019.
Yes.
I was just going to quote.
I read that.
And so in November 2019, just weeks before the COVID pandemic, among the observations in this November 2019 report was not recommended in any circumstances, contact tracing, quarantine of exposed individuals, entry and exit screening, border closures. And yet all of these things were done within a few weeks.
Yeah.
The Johns Hopkins University, a major medical center in the United States, did a a pandemic plan in the summer of 2019. And they expressed that there was weak evidence to support all of these measures individually or in combination. And they emphasized too that politicians would have an incentive to implement these measures, not on scientific or public health grounds, but to show they were in charge. That's another thing that resonates from some of these pandemic
to abate fear.
To abate fear, to try to show that they're exercising leadership. The UK did a pandemic plan in 2011, and it said that in conditions of global travel, respiratory viruses would be impossible to contain at the border. And all of these measures would be very costly in human terms, human welfare, not just in economic terms. And they could not be relied upon, I'm quoting, even to buy time. So there was more skepticism there too. There were optimists.
Yes, you're right. I remember. And maybe if I can interrupt you.
Sure.
What I find fascinating, also reading your studies on that, on the one hand you have this WHO, the World Health Organization. I could say it's the central institution worldwide. I think in a very high esteem at the time, at least at the time was. We can see that all warned of the devastating effects, especially effects on the children.
Children and
the working class. And the working class people.
Yes, exactly. Who had to keep working. 1/3 of workers had to keep working to keep the rest of us having food delivered, the electricity on, internet running.
So that's I think a very fascinating thing. Because we also have the so-called laptop class. We call them the laptop class.
We do too.
The people who are doing a different kind of job, also policymakers, of course.
Yes.
And you could say this social division in a way was reflected in the moral outlook of the people that defined these policies.
I think the essential workers tended to be invisible. I mean, I think people, there was a lot of panic. At that time, a great fear, of course. Look, it was a bad virus. It was the worst pandemic in a century. Let's not minimize it. But I think there was a lot of panic and fear, and I think essential workers who were not of our professional class, our associates and so on, not seeing them online, became fairly invisible during this time. And so it does seem to be the case that working class people who had to keep working, in many cases, bore a disproportionate burden. Much harder for them to deal with kids staying at home, much less likely to have good internet connections, large houses, for kids to socially distance in and do their own homework and so on. And so in a worse position to be able to keep their kids home from school, because they had to keep working. We're talking about healthcare workers.
Yes, exactly. And what I also find fascinating, that you said, well, there were some positive reports on the policies. For example, the quarantine and the social distancing.
Yes.
But one profession was, I think, very important regarding that kind of policies, and the mathematicians and the
Yes.
modelers.
Yes.
That's a fascinating thing.
Yes.
They have a different outlook on the world.
Yeah, well, modeling is important to
Yeah.
scientific theory and trying to make sense of data. But right from 2005, when George W. Bush, president at that time, read John Barry's book on the great influenza of 1918 to 1919, he initiated some planning exercises then. And mathematical modelers played a powerful role in shaping an optimism towards these measures. Now, look, a lot of the models are based on speculation.
Yeah.
They model behavior, they make projections, imaginative, based on how they think social contact will change. And the measure that they thought was most important was school closures.
Yeah.
They made the judgment that kids cannot be stopped from interacting with each other. Kids will not socially distance. They'll want to wrestle and play with each other and so on. So they had to be kept home isolated. And they actually projected that school closures themselves could reduce peak death rates by 50%. Again, quite speculative. But there's a real central concern or preoccupation, one might say, with keeping kids home from school. And of course, what they don't model is the cost of these measures.
And was there a kind of consensus in this group, you can say, at the time?
There was a dissent, but there was a powerful group of mathematical models who remained powerful at the beginning of COVID.
Yeah.
Neil Ferguson at Imperial College London was one of them. And there were others who the New York Times talked about. Michael Lewis, a popular writer of books in the United States, also, they're the heroes of his early account of the pandemic called The Premonition. So they retained influence and they represented an important constituency that was optimistic about these measures. I should say the Institute of Medicine, which became the National Institute of Medicine in 2005, commissioned an expert group to assess these modeled projections. It was led by actually a fellow who was a professor at Princeton at the time, and a very eminent group, including Harvard professors and so on. And they looked at the empirical evidence to support these measures and found they were unconvinced. They thought that these measures were unlikely to work, that there was very little evidence for them, that they would be extremely costly, and that it was very important for political leaders, public officials, to be emphatic with the public before implementing these measures, that the evidence was weak, and that they were certain to be very costly, not just in economic terms, but in terms of basic human well-being. D.A. Henderson, another scientist, credited with being the most responsible person for eradicating smallpox. He also, he was eventually dean of Johns Hopkins University School of Public Health. He also participated in writing some work, things on these models, and said, very unconvinced, that communities respond best to these kinds of episodes when they're least disrupted, maintain normal social functioning. Some social distancing behavior voluntarily, but that these deep disruptions would be unhelpful and not
in Europe, Sweden was one of the countries who had that kind of policy. But I think it's also an indication of this shift in almost in mentality or in outlook on the world, that we have these big data, and we're all trying to formulate and describe reality in terms of algorithms, and like the importance of this kind of science in comparison to, for example, 30, 40 years ago. I think is huge. When you think that the modelers have become more and more important, and we have all those data. In the Netherlands, we were always talking about the dashboard. The dashboard.
Same in the States.
So it's like a worldwide terminology. What we we're gonna use the buttons and
to reduce case counts and so on. Yes, it gave us an illusion of control.
Yes, exactly.
We could count things, and that's exactly what D.A. Henderson and the others who were skeptical about these measures said. Respiratory viruses that are aerosolized, in particular, are extremely difficult to control. When a country like China started to shut down, there were still thousands of people flying to Western countries, coming back. They couldn't fly back directly, they'd fly through somewhere else.
Yeah.
In a globalized economy, it's extremely difficult to contain these things.
So, but when you take a look at the beginning of the pandemic, then at first we're not following the strict rules or guidelines we saw in China.
Yeah.
Even Fauci says we're not going that way.
Right.
This is only a totalitarian state who can do it.
Yes.
So how let's take a look at this. The first months. What do you see?
Right. What we see is exactly what you said. That when China locked down Wuhan city and Hebei province, I think it was January 22nd. 60 million people under quarantine, largest experiment of that kind in human history. Dr. Fauci said exactly what you said, that this has been tried before, it's never worked in the past, it's unlikely that it'll work now, and we could never do something like that in New York or Los Angeles. I just can't imagine it. And there was similar skepticism from people around the world. Now, there were several measures that seemed to reverse that.
Yeah.
One was that the World Health Organization sent a team to China, a joint China rest of the world mission, so half Chinese scientists, half not from China, only 2 Americans on it. I don't know if there was anyone from the Netherlands. They spent a week in China, only a week, taken around by the government, and concluded at the end of 1 week that China had whipped the virus. That never before in human history had a country eradicated a respiratory virus, but that China had succeeded. And they wrote a brief report that was like an award citation. And they recommended that every country in the world should follow China's strategy. They were emphatic. They said this can work anywhere, and that any country in the world. I mean, ignoring the apps that people were forced to use on their phones, so contact trace, and the authoritarian measures that were available to the Chinese government. People were literally being bolted into their apartments, as was being reported in January.
Yeah.
So nevertheless, they recommended them to these measures to everyone in the world.
It looked horrible at the time. I mean,
yes.
we had those pictures of people screaming.
Yes, there were very harsh mandatory measures. Another thing that happened was Imperial College London on March 16th put out a report. Neil Ferguson, who was one of the mathematical modelers, led that group, saying that unless the United States implemented these measures, the whole suite of non-pharmaceutical measures, border closures, school closures, etc., we'd have the worst case, but it was dealt with as a prediction, that we'd have 2.2 million dead Americans by August that year, just in a few months, 500,000 in the UK. That was extremely frightening. And then the other thing that was important was that the head of the World Health Organization, the director, said in early March, that the death rate from COVID, quite ambiguous what he meant by that, was 3.4%. A very frightening figure. So those 3 things came together, and then the pictures from northern Italy in particular, Bergamo, yes, the hospital wards being overwhelmed, people on ventilators and so on. Those pictures went around the world, extremely frightening to people. And then Italy was the first, they imposed regional lockdowns, and then a national lockdown, the first country in the world before China to impose a national lockdown. And lo and behold, people went along with it. People supported it. So that had a very big demonstration effect. I mean, prior to that, Boris Johnson was resisting the lockdown measures. Some other countries were too. But those things in combination certainly led in the United States on March 16th, the day of the Imperial College report from London, Neil Ferguson. Trump had a news conference that day with Dr. Fauci and Deborah Birx, the coordinator, held up a document that said at the bottom, in places with community transmission, bars should close, schools should close, these non-pharmaceutical measures should be implemented as a recommendation. And so around the country and then around the world, these measures were introduced very quickly. By early April, half the world's population, 3.9 billion people under some sort of quarantine.
Yeah, the question remains, of course, that was it simply like a reaction of fear, in which Matthias de Smet speaks of a mass formation, it was Gustave Le Bon who first introduced this hypnotic state of mass.
And mass hysteria.
Yeah, mass hysteria. Or was there something else going on? What do you think?
Well, I think that's part of it. I mean, the fact is that journalists didn't do their jobs.
No.
They didn't ask tough questions. They exacerbated the fear.
But why not? Why?
Well, it's a little, you know, we report what happened. We don't claim to have as good an explanation as we might. But again, the elite journalists who are guiding the narratives are also, as you said yourself a minute ago, members of the laptop class. Yeah. They're capable of working from home, working remotely, or you know, working online and so on. So I think they had the same kind of prejudices and biases as other elites. Now, there's another factor in the United States that a couple of things. One is that having a 4-year college degree, and certainly even a graduate degree, is much more strongly associated with the Democratic Party than used to be the case. So there's a strong partisan divide, that's an education divide in the United States. And of course, Trump was in office, and 2020 was an election year. And people were, many elites in particular, were terrified that Trump would win again. So I do think the partisan aspect was distinctive in the United States. Okay. That Donald Trump, at a certain point, he of course went along with the lockdown measures early on. Yeah. His advisors told him it's going to be 15 days to slow the spread, very short. That was manipulation on their part. They always wanted longer closures until the vaccines were available. But he went along with the extension to 30 days and then maybe 45 days. And then he started arguing.
Because he was very critical at first. On the measures.
He was critical at first, but then he went along.
So he went along.
He went along.
But they trying to seduce him in a way, let's start with this and then.
Yes, definitely that was the case. But the other thing, I've read the memoirs by Dr. Fauci and Deborah Birx and so on, and they talk about Trump, and it's weird. I mean, he was almost like a critic of his own administration, but he never overrode them. So he allowed them to announce the policies. He had news conferences where he'd sort of chip in these remarks from the side, and he'd make these, you know, critical remarks about the need to reopen the economy, the need to reopen schools and so on. But he never overrode people.
But he distanced himself a little bit of the.
Yes, but then the reopening became associated with him, became associated with the Republican Party, because Republican states started to reopen quicker. Everyone closed down in the United States in March for a few weeks, and April, really. A few schools in the United States reopened in May, but they all reopened in Republican states basically in the fall. Most Democratic states stayed closed in the fall of 2020 through much of the 2021 school year. So there's a big partisan divide emerged over the summer.
And how can we understand that partisan divide? Has it something to do with religion, for example, the fundamental rights?
Those things, education is the big driver now. The tendency of having a 4-year college degree. And of course that goes along with the class difference, where working class people have moved to a greater extent than in the past, not entirely, to the Republican Party. So it's an education divide, and you know the slogan in the United States was "Follow the science."
Yeah, exactly. I was also here.
Yeah,
I think.
And that's elites saying "Follow elites," and those who dissented were called agents of misinformation. Yeah. So I think there was.
We had the Dutch word for wappies. Wappies, they're in fact mad people. You don't have to take them very serious.
Yeah. So it became very intense. I mean, the surprising thing, you know, in a way, is European schools in England, France, Germany, I believe, started to reopen in many cases in April and May. Not all of them, but many of them did. And the European education ministers put out a report in May 2020. Saying that our schools have been reopened for weeks now. They're not showing signs of spreading the virus. So many schools in Europe reopened, so in the fall of 2020. Not in the Netherlands, I gather, in many cases.
And university was closed as well.
Universities were closed. Even Sweden closed universities. Sweden did never close schools for kids under 16. But they did close upper high school and universities. But as you said, they in general had much more voluntary measures.
But so you see this the divide in the United States between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. it's related to the background, but of course within you can say the policy making part of the Republicans are also high educated people. So how can we explain that difference?
Well, yeah. Again, it's a bit puzzling, and it could have gone either way because also Republican constituencies tend to be older people. You might have thought that they would be more anxious about these things. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, for example, he brought in some experts. He brought in these scientists who were dissenters from the policy, the great Barrington Declaration authors. He brought in 2 of them. And I've talked to Jay Bhattacharya, one of those authors. And
I talked to him too. And we have a program out.
Oh, great. Yeah, he's a very thoughtful person. Well, Ron DeSantis read the research findings and so on, and he insisted that schools be reopened. I don't know, but Rand Paul certainly was a critic of various measures, and he's been pursuing the origins of the virus question. Rand Paul, his son. But DeSantis insisted that schools be reopened in Florida in the fall of 2020. He has an elderly population that's large in Florida. If that had been the wrong call, he could have paid a big political price. But what the experience showed was that Florida did not have any higher death rate than California, for example, which was closed schools throughout the entire 2021 school year, basically, and had much more strict lockdowns. So the 2 things we learned in the States is there was this big partisan divide that developed over the summer. Republican states reopened faster. Democratic states closed longer. I'm oversimplifying, but all the measures were much more intense and long-lasting in Democratic states. And what we find is that we can look at the empirical evidence across the states, such as it is. That's the evidence that's available. And there was no gain in mortality for the states that stayed closed longer. Democratic states did no better in terms of COVID mortality than Republican states. So, and this is true in Europe as well. We lack evidence that longer, tougher lockdown measures, school closures, business closures, contact tracing, mask wearing, we simply lack evidence that those measures reduced mortality.
It's fascinating, and the so-called non-pharmaceutical interventions, the NPIs, and you mentioned them. A lot of them had huge impact on the circumstances people were living in, especially for the working class and the young children. And up to this day, at least in the Netherlands, we see hardly any fundamental reflection on what we did at the time.
Right.
And because in this the New Wereld, the New World, this program, we were very skeptical, critical on all, especially the non-pharmaceutical interventions. And for me, it was clear from the start it would have a huge impact on the development of children, for example. And in a way, I felt ashamed as a father, as a father in relation to this younger generation. As a professor at the university, I tried to organize alternatives. So I hired
for kids.
For the students. I hired a room outside the university. I made it possible that they could come and follow courses because and they were very happy about that because it was also for students at the time, 20 years, 21 years. It had a huge impact on their life.
Oh, I think that's absolutely right. I think it's absolutely right. And we had good evidence coming from China by March, that the kids were at very low risk. We had very good evidence that there was very low risk. The age profile in terms of vulnerability was very striking, and it was very striking very early. So you're absolutely right. The incredibly high price was paid. And the other thing that happened to shape the discourse in the United States was there was social media companies suppressing critical information. We now know that started quite early. So those who were making arguments, such as you may have been, about the importance of reopening schools and the harm that would come to children, saw their social media messages being deboosted algorithmically. A friend of mine who works in education in the United States said that he posted something online, and he edits an education journal. And as soon as he posted, providing evidence for the harm to children based on previous teacher strikes and weather events that kept schools closed for a few weeks, based on that information, he said the harms will be terrible. And he said his journal disappeared from the web once that was put on. Yes. We now know that the Biden administration, but even previous to that in Trump, they were contacting social media companies to deboost messages that they felt was misinformation.
Mark Zuckerberg came with this.
Zuckerberg, yes, has said this. Yes,
he declared that he regrets the policy at the time. But nevertheless, but for me, it's still important to understand what's the background of this huge shift. We also saw it in the Netherlands at the time. It was a matter of days, in fact, that there was like a huge turnaround. And is it simply a matter of this fear and the different elements you mentioned, or has it also something to do with for example, certain profits that could be made, or maybe even like a perverse interest in what would happen? Can we do this social experiment? I don't know, but of course it's obvious that the pharmaceutical industry had a huge interest in this. That the vaccines would be the only solution. So they. For them, it was interesting that we would shut down the whole of society and then say, well, there is one solution, and then it's very fascinating that we found this solution within a year. I think it's
well, that was a big success story. I think we have to allow that. We don't purport to fully explain what happened. I will say that. The lockdown measures were very popular in the countries early on in the countries in which they were adopted, but the publics demanded it. Again, journlists kept asking.
This was even in the Netherlands. They demanded it.
Right. Why isn't more being done?
Look us up. Look us up.
So part of it was, of course, we know there's evidence that by the summer, people vastly overestimated their vulnerability. They vastly overestimated children's vulnerability. And we had ample evidence by then. Mark Woolhouse, the Scottish epidemiologist, wrote a very good book called The Year the World Went Mad. He shows that now we have evidence now that in the UK and in Germany, the public health agencies were in touch with journalists, telling them people aren't afraid enough. You need to ramp up the fear level. And the BBC, it was that young people are. The quote was, they're being lulled into complacency by the low mortality rates in their demographic. Very few of them are dying, therefore they're not as frightened as they should be. So you need to ramp up the fear level, and they did. We see this in books that were published early on about the COVID pandemic, highlighting young people, athletic people, in their 30s and 40s who died of COVID. There were such cases, but they were extremely rare. Dr. Sanjay Gupta, who's a famous TV doctor in the United States on cable news network, starts off his book with 4 cases of very healthy people in their 30s and 40s who died or get extremely ill from COVID. Very unrepresentative cases, but those are the 4 cases he starts with. So there was a lot of, I think some of it conscious, some of it unconscious manipulation of the reality around COVID. I mean, the way that one doctor put it over the summer was, your chances of dying from COVID were your chances of dying in the next year, just packed into 2 weeks. So a very high, gradient towards people in their 80s and 90s, and especially people with serious comorbidities. Again, it was a bad virus. All deaths are tragic. But there was simply a lack of realism and an unwillingness to pay attention to evidence. And I think it's partly journalism, public officials, and the public itself to some extent, not being critical enough.
And of course, I think big tech had this huge opportunity to technolize society.
Yes, to go online. To go online. No, absolutely.
I used to speak about the pandemic of technology. I cannot translate it in the right way. It's called pandemie van de techniek. It's like technology, but I mean it's also the having this technology. We were able to register all kind of things.
Yes.
So it's the way we look at the pandemic is also determined by technology itself. And it's also the proliferation of technology, because we say, well, we can take these measures, those apps.
Absolutely. We were isolated at home on our screens. My own students even now emphasize just how important social media became, how important it became during COVID, because that was your window onto the world for learning, for news, and so on. So I do think that the forces that you mention did play a role. It's a little hard as a social scientist to get a grip, on the causal contributions, and I think it'll take decades to figure out exactly what happened. But we can see that these measures, these non-pharmaceutical measures, in spite of the weak evidence for them, in spite of the predictions that they would certainly be costly, were adopted around the world. The evidence shows that in Europe, the 29 states of Europe diverged even more widely than the United States in terms of how long they closed schools for, borders closed, all these measures, widely divergence. And the best study that we have available, based on total morbidity during COVID, excess morbidity during COVID, and excess morbidity the 10 years before, adjusted for age and other factors. Again, the authors from the University of Milan, Pizzato et al., find, surprisingly to the authors, no relationship between longer closures, school closures, business closures, and mortality.
Crazy.
No relationship across Europe. So that's what the evidence shows at the moment. All these measures were extremely costly, and we just can't show a benefit in terms of mortality.
What role did China play at the time, do you think? Was it simply a success story in the beginning? Or
Well, news, yes, it was claimed to be a success story in the beginning.
Only in the beginning.
Well,
you can discuss about that also, of course.
They didn't reopen fully until 2023, I believe it was.
I
think around March 2023 or something. And of course,
but it was a complete failure at the time.
Well,
it was.
The
people didn't comply anymore.
Well, that's right. When it was, when they just were trying to lengthen the closures again, there was an uproar. People rebelled, and I've given talks in China, not on this because that was not possible to talk, but I've talked to students and others over there individually about the pandemic in small groups, and people's faces just freeze. For them, it was a horrible circumstance. I knew people that were locked into apartment buildings, didn't know if they'd have enough water and food. Of course, there was forcible quarantines and so on. So no, I think it was very traumatic for China, and there were some very serious demonstrations against the government as well during that time. But it's very hard to get information, reliable information. I mean, the other issue that comes out of China is the origins of the virus.
It's still a huge topic.
It's still a huge topic. This is another one which there's been a lot of misinformation. And this is where there were denials in the United States, but it turns out that Wuhan, where the virus originated, has a lab that does gain-of-function research on bat coronaviruses. It was such research was being funded by the United States government. It was in collaboration with the University of North Carolina. I mean, the idea is to try to anticipate future pathogens by manipulating genetic sequences, even mixing and matching them a bit.
Also, in that sense, it might be a pandemic of the technology.
Well, that's right. Netherlands actually has a big lab. Erasmus Institute. Marion Koopmans, I think is the name of the doctor.
You're right about it.
And it's very fascinating. We have a chapter on this in the book, but when the virus emerged in Wuhan, scientists in China posted the genetic sequence of the novel coronavirus online. And there was a doctor in California at the Scripps Institute who works in this area and looked at the genetic sequence and said, this is exactly the sort of work they're doing in Wuhan, the Wuhan Institute of Virology. In fact, he had a research paper written by one of the doctors there that looked like a how-to manual to create this He
Do you know Jan Bonte in the Netherlands?
I don't think I know the name.
No. Because he was in very early stage. He did a fundamental research on the origins of the virus, and he was one of the first in the Netherlands, at least, who had he was a scientist himself, working in the medical field, and but he was in a very early stage. he just made clear what kind of connections there were, and that it's very probable that there was a human-caused virus.
It's certainly very plausible. This is the sort of thing that's still not discussable in the United States. Nature magazine did an article in February this past year.
Well, why not? Because even I think even the CIA takes the.
Yes, but it's not clear to me. I think people worry that sort of changing the narrative on this would make science look bad.
Okay.
I've talked to scientists in the United States about this at Harvard and University of Pennsylvania and elsewhere, and I've asked them in confidence, do you think, because there were these scientists in the United States that they suspected it came from the lab, then they talked to Drs. Fauci and Collins online, and then they published an article claiming, oh no, it came from nature. We have email messages they sent each other while they were working on the article saying it came from nature, not the lab, saying it's just so friggin' likely it came from the lab. So they seem to, in private, have one thought and in public have another. And I've asked scientists, do you think those scientists who change their minds in public and say it came from nature are telling the truth? No, don't think so. Would you say that in public? No, we wouldn't say it in public. So there's an unwillingness to go public.
Up to this day.
Up to this day. And I think public health has this paternalistic mindset very strongly. There was a scientist.
Yeah, but I think they're also afraid that when it's funded research, that they lose their funds. That science becomes criticized. That especially this kind of research.
Yes. Doing your dirty laundry in public. So the National Institutes of Health in the United States is by far the biggest funding agency in the world, $46 billion. All of the public health funding comes from one institute, very hierarchical funding agency. And that was Dr. Francis Collins and Dr. Fauci during the pandemic. So they wielded enormous power. But
the book isn't closed. Huh? I mean, also with the new government now.
Yes. Well, hopefully, yes. And then, some members of Congress have done some very good reports based on this. The House Republican Committee did a report that came out in 2024, was it? The fall of 2024? 2023, 24. Very good, but not covered very much by the New York Times and so on, not being covered by the mainstream media. And Nature magazine had this article in February 2025 saying more and more evidence that it came from raccoon dogs in the market. Yes, these hedgehog kinds of things. They quote six people. They only quote six scientists, all of whom have long on the record, including these scientists that changed their mind in public and private and said it came from nature. They quote no one on the other side. A couple of weeks later, the French Academy voted 97% to 3% that the lab origin is just as probable as natural origin. Some reports said it leaned towards the lab origin. But
so now we're talking about the origin of the virus. But I also had this idea that China had become a kind of a paradigm of the super technological society. It was very successful in economics. So. Like they were the good how do you call it like the best practices place.
Well, it's it's hard to say. There's obviously a lot of state power in China, a lot of security cameras and so on and so forth. So some have argued that the Chinese use this to sort of develop and enhance their control technologies. We stick in the book to talk about the pandemic. We don't have a lot of information, good data on what happened in China and so on. So we try to tell what we find a puzzling story. And I think the explanations and the deeper understanding is going to take a while.
Yeah, because we started to imitate all those policies. And it's like China can build those huge buildings only in a year time. They can create factories. They have the double numbers, economic growth, etc., etc. And now they are slamming the virus or something like that, and let's follow their example.
Yeah, it's again hard to say. I mean, China's had an economic miracle,
exactly.
since the 1980s, and it's hugely impressive. It's made a huge difference to the well-being. I mean, never in human history have so many people risen out of desperate poverty. So, we have to allow that that's a very impressive achievement. But I do worry about, another aspect of this would be dissent, reasonable dissent, people dissenting from policies being called agents of misinformation or disinformation. I think during COVID, reasonable questions, reasonable dissent was coded as misinformation and disinformation. And we talk in the book about an article that was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in the fall of 2023.
Did China himself play a role in that? Because also this turn into a World Health Organization, like the importance of China in the policies.
China does exercise a lot of influence in the World Health Organization. People have written about that. They provide much greater funding than they did in the past. The United States, I think, has cut funding for World Health Organization. I think they do exercise influence there. Mistakes were made by Western governments on their own. I don't want to blame everything on China.
No. But it's trying to understand what happened, and China played this role as well. I think in this remarkable change of policy.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a book on COVID and international relations, and a couple of the essays in there talk about the greater Chinese influence within the World Health Organization. Yeah. There's evidence we talk about in the book that the report that this group that went to China for 1 week.
Yes, exactly.
What the group you mentioned. We see some emails sending each other, we have to revise this so it doesn't upset the Chinese and so on. There was, I think, the fact of funding and other kinds of things meant that people are reluctant to upset Chinese authorities and the World Health Organization. There seemed to be some evidence of that. But I think Western societies and Western governments and Western educated elites. Yeah. We shouldn't blame.
No, definitely. We have our own responsibility.
We have our own responsibility. That's right. Yes. And but the fact was that they were taken to demonstrate something. And in spite of that skepticism that people talked about early on, policy did turn on a dime in March and April. And I think the most problematic thing is that when dissenters started to emerge over the summer and so on, they were called fringe types. They were criticized and condemned.
Even famous scientists like Ioannidis, for example.
Yes,
it's
no question. John Ioannidis at Stanford University, one of the most cited scientists in the world. I mean, some of it was so silly. They were saying things early on like, look, we know how many people are getting sick. We don't know how many people in the population have been exposed to the virus. Why isn't the government doing, it's called seroprevalence study, testing people, which you could do early on, just to see how many have evidence of having been exposed to the virus, so we'll know what the real mortality rate is from the virus. We knew who was showing up in hospitals, doctor's offices very ill. Yeah. We didn't know how many people were exposed to the virus who weren't ill. And the government never did studies on that in the United States. I don't think they did studies on it in Europe either.
Did you realize at the time that something wrong was going on, or were you not interested in the...
I was working on other things personally.
Yeah.
And, so I had a relatively...
So you went along?
I went along, yes. I knew the mass mandates were kind of silly. You could see the way people were wearing them and so on. And the origins of the virus that was called a conspiracy theory that had come from Wuhan, that also was ridiculous. But I didn't mind. I was working, doing a little bit of teaching and administration, to have meetings canceled and to be able to stay home rather than go to work online. Actually, I think my well-being actually went up a bit during COVID. So I'm a member of the laptop class. So the findings of this book are research-based for me. I didn't go in with strong priors. No. And the skepticism that I've developed about these measures, these very costly measures, is based on the research we did, not having strong pre-commitments.
Yeah, now that's good to know. Then the period, the vaccine was developed and introduced.
Yes.
It was a kind of a disappointment. We were at first there was an euphoria.
Yeah.
We have it. We have the final solution.
Yeah.
And then already a few months later, it wasn't that effective as we wanted it.
Well,
or a half a year or something.
Yeah, I mean, I would caution a little bit on this. We do find that mortality rates in the United States, in Republican states, went up above Democratic states after the vaccine was available, because the vaccine hesitancy in the Republican states led to higher death counts. We have no evidence of higher deaths before the vaccine. So no evidence that the non-pharmaceutical measures made a difference, but the pharmaceutical measures made a difference. Now, it's true, people oversold the vaccines. Dr. Fauci and others said things like, if you get the vaccine, you will be a dead end to the virus. You cannot, you won't transmit it, and so on.
There was no scientific evidence for that.
No, zero scientific evidence. That was not an end state for the in the vaccine trials.
In the Netherlands, they said you have to take the vaccine then to protect your granddaddies and your grandmom.
It does reduce transmission and reduce, but it didn't perfectly do that for sure. And you could still get the virus. You could still pass it on. It's true. So it was oversold. But it was.
How come you think? Because Fauci must have known that there was no evidence on that you could end the pandemic with this.
Well, they thought it was very important for people to get the vaccines.
Yeah. So
I can't read people's minds, but there were various things on which it was clear that people were being misled in order to encourage them to wait for the vaccines and then to get the vaccines. So to encourage them to wait for the vaccine, the reality of natural immunity was denied in some places.
Yes, exactly. But I think it's very frightening to realize that the people in charge are willing to lie or manipulate, at least manipulate.
Yes.
In a democratic society, in which you want.
But unfortunately, this is one of the things that COVID has revealed, and we haven't grasped that fully. You mentioned John Ioannidis from Stanford, the famous professor.
How is he doing right now?
Well, I think he's doing okay. But there was an article in the Washington Post talking about him early in the pandemic, December 2020. And the controversy around him because he was dissenting on some of these matters and so on. And they quote one of his colleagues at Stanford who says about Ioannidis, well, he's a good scientist, but, criticism is an important part of the scientific process, his colleague said. But it should take place in private, not in public. So his colleague was actually willing to say to the Washington Post on the public record, it's okay for scientists to criticize one another, but not in public, which is to say, you should hide criticism from the public. And so it's unbelievable that you would say that. But not only was he saying, he said it, to a reporter for the Washington Post. So I think there is this weird sense, which is utterly undemocratic and inconsistent, I think, with fundamental liberal norms of free speech and so on, that somehow dissent shouldn't be aired, among, I think, public health scientists in particular. I don't think we fully understand it. I think we need to understand more about the kind of sociology of public health science. There's a book called The Crisis of Expertise by Gil Eyal, E-Y-A-L. He talks about the differences that occur when science moves from being pure research, investigating speculative questions, to making policy advice. And one of the things he observes is that when scientists start offering policy advice, there's a tendency to think, okay, now that our advice has been settled on, we need to circle the wagons and all support the measures. He finds that this is a book written before COVID. But the COVID experience reinforces that something's going wrong.
I've been writing about that too, and I think it has something to do also with the lack of, you could say, a more ideological or even a religious outlook on life, and instead science is more and more becoming one of the so-called absolute truth-fulfilling actors in life, like the former Catholic Church. Now you have the institutions of the university or experts, like the Pauls himself.
The deepest sources of authority in our society. They wield the greatest authority.
The sources of truth. In fact, and that's strange transformation. It has something to do with, I think, also the lack of other fundamental political and moral sources.
No, that
like let science decide. We follow science.
Yes,
because then you don't understand what science is.
Right.
Science cannot talk about what is the good life.
Values. No, absolutely right. It has nothing to say about values.
Yeah.
Right? It can only offer some empirical predictions that may or may not be good. Some levels of uncertainty. No, of course, Giorgio Agamben has written quite a lot along these lines.
Yes.
That science wields this kind of authority, and of course we reduce our concerns to bare life. Whatever it takes to keep ourselves alive, and focus narrowly on that, and ignore all of the things that give life value. No, he's done some very interesting work along those lines, and I think there are many matters for reflection that COVID gives us. Again, our book is about COVID as a window onto the state of our democracy and the state of our public culture. I think it reveals a lot that's troubling.
Definitely.
Quite apart from the question of the policies and the outcomes and so on. But it's a very dispiriting window onto that. And
that's exactly for me one of the reasons that I really dived into it, because I think what goes on is also a reflection of what's happening to our society, and what on a fundamental level.
Yes, at a fundamental level, and as we've been asked the question, are you worried about our book coming out in March 2025? Given that Donald Trump is in office, criticizing science, attacking universities, are you worried that would give support? And our response has been, look, we support universities, we support science, we believe in these institutions. This is what we do for a living. But in order for those institutions to function properly, those who work within them have to be willing to criticize them when they go wrong. We have to be honest about our own shortcomings. I have many colleagues working on populism and the dangers of right-wing authoritarian populism. Fair enough, but educated elites also need to be self-critical.
Definitely.
That's what we hope, that this might encourage others to be more open and honest about mistakes, that were made in the precincts of educated institutions, universities, medicine, and so on.
In fact, you can say this work has to be done to save the legitimacy of science itself.
Yes.
And I think it's that we have a legitimacy problem at the moment, and the policies surrounding COVID are only, I think, one of the indications that we seriously have to consider what is going on.
Absolutely, and people experience these things firsthand. So they know what happened. They know the mistakes that were made, and a lot of trust has been lost. So I think candor, honesty is the only way to begin to restore that.
When we take a look at Donald Trump's policy right now regarding universities, I think it has something to do, of course, with this so-called woke culture. But I think the pandemic plays also a big role in it, isn't it?
Well, apparently it does. There's been a loss of trust in scientific institutions and universities, greatest among Republicans. And the main thing is that if we're not self-critical enough, we don't deserve to be trusted. So I think the most important way to restore trust is to be trustworthy. And the way to be trustworthy is to admit when mistakes have been made, to admit our uncertainties, to not overclaim, for there to be a little more humility about scientific findings. We have some quotations in the book from Francis Collins and other head of the National Institutes of Health, allowing that public health officials speaking to the public about COVID and other matters were not honest about the limits of their knowledge, their uncertainty. They wanted to say things that got people to do the right thing in case they were right. But they were uncertain, and they didn't admit that, and they lost a lot of trust as a consequence. I think that's right. Scientists need to exercise more humility about the limits of our knowledge.
Definitely. How's the reception of your book right now?
The reception's basically been very good. We've been very happy with it. Early on, the New York Times did a whole 1-hour podcast with us on their daily, their most popular podcast. We were on television networks and so on, and have been reviewed in lots of places. So the response has generally been good. There are there were some progressive outlets where we've been called liars and so on. Well, it's on Blue Sky, which is this very progressive.
That's such a crazy thing. I mean, the progressives used to be very critical regarding the traditional institutions, but now it's the other way around.
Well, it's been very surprising. Yes, I had a colleague who's a good close friend who, half jokingly, I guess, introduced me to someone else at a party at the beginning of the year as, oh yes, Steve and his colleague are pandemic deniers.
Oh yeah, pandemic deniers.
Which was in the Atlantic, a review by a very smart guy who we talked to on the phone said that we were nihilists. And I don't know why he said we were nihilists, except that we're not confident that those non-pharmaceutical measures didn't reduce mortality. But that's what the evidence shows. The evidence fails to show an effect.
But is there the difference between, let's say, the public reception and the reception at the university?
Well, a lot of people are not paying. I think a lot of people are not paying. Some are not paying much attention. Okay. I would say our university president's been very good. He's given copies of the book to all the trustees.
Okay.
He's been excellent, and we're doing a couple of forums this coming year. But there, and there one or two scientists have been in touch, but many of them not. I just think it's very hard for people. It's very hard.
But also to acknowledge that you are on the wrong path. I mean,
yes. We sacrificed a lot. You know this. Personally, we sacrificed a lot. To look back now and face the possibility that those lockdown measures, the staying at home, the school closures, all that time on computers and so on, that it didn't actually achieve anything.
And
it's a very sobering thing to face.
Yeah, and a lot of people promoted those measures and were criticizing the people who were critical about it. So it was a huge divide within families and so
yes, absolutely, absolutely.
And then to say, well, maybe we were wrong. But I think it's the beginning of redemption.
Well, we hope so, and this won't be the last pandemic. So we should try to learn from our experience. And so we appreciate opportunities like this. And it's been.
But did we learn? You think up to now, or is there still a lot of work to do?
It's still a lot of work to do. I mean, we have this data on the 50 states, and Posado et al. Have the data on the 29 countries of Europe. It's at 30,000 feet. We don't have more local data. So within the states, the United States, there are blue areas and Republican areas within the states. It would be good if we had better data.
That's also a problem over here.
But it's very weird that the data wasn't gathered.
Like there was an unwilliness to gather the data, and it's very strange.
I agree with you. And I don't.
And why not? Why not? Why are you afraid of?
I don't understand it. Yes, I don't understand it. I mean, people were busy, of course, with other things. Maybe things were more urgent, but I don't understand it at all. I mean, in the United States, universities had very different policies. We were testing students twice a week at Princeton when they were on campus. Other universities reopened up. There's a huge data set there in the United States as well. I mean, different universities. This data must be there.
But there's even unwillingness to provide the data to research.
Yes. Oh, there's no question about that. Our government has had information pried out of it through freedom of information requests, which you can do. So a lot of relevant data has been subpoenaed. Documents are redacted.
And I think that's the most terrifying thing right now. That there's still this unwillingness and even I would say the stubbornness to hold on that what we did was completely okay.
Well, I think there's a lot to that, and we need much greater transparency. We need much greater openness to having public records inspected, public documents inspected, the bases of decisions inspected.
Exactly.
And but we need journalists and university colleagues to pay more attention as well.
Yeah.
I think my students are very eager. I mean, college students now would have been high school when the pandemic came down. They lost years of high school.
Yes, of course.
So I think that they are both traumatized by it, but want to know what happened. And so hopefully there'll be more willingness in the future.
Stephen, I'd like to thank you for this very illuminating conversation.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
And I think books like these are very important the next decade to make sure that we won't make the same mistakes again. So thank you very much.
Let's hope. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much.